Right, so hello everyone. I'm going to talk about the Pharmaceutical Quality System. I'm going to have a little bit of an overview of what it actually is and what we're talking about when we talk about the PQS, and my expectation of what should be the leadership's involvement in that. Like Brian mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about inspection data. So we had an MHRA inspector speak at one of our earlier conferences this year, and he provided some data which I've got to share with you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about quality management maturity and how the senior leadership team can influence that process. So just a reminder of what the responsibility of SLT is with regards to the PQS. So there's some extracts there from ICHQ 10 and also from UDREX Volume 4, Chapter 1. And ultimately, I think, the important things there are in bold, that it's the ultimate responsibility of the senior management team to ensure that the quality system is in place, it's effective, and that it's continuously improving. And then again, in the Chapter 1 extract there, senior management leadership and active participation in the pharmaceutical quality system is essential. So I'm sure we've all had the pleasure of sitting through quality management review meetings where there's just silence from all of the senior leaders in the room and nobody asks any probing questions, and the poor quality director's there trying to get everyone engaged, and it's essentially just a painful process. So that's, a reminder of the active participation in the PQS, I think, is always important. And just to highlight there, that's the topics that we're talking about when we talk about management commitment to quality. So essentially, it should be really easy. The PQS, you say what you're going to do, you do what you've said you're going to do, you then prove it, document it, and then you continuously review it to improve it. The ultimate purpose of the PQS is to protect patient safety and product quality, but also to protect the site manufacturing authorization. So, to make sure that you're doing things that you're permitted to do. And sometimes I think that is forgotten. And so this is the information from MHRA on major and critical GMP deficiencies between January 2023 up to May 2025. So these are the top observations. And all of these ones circled in yellow here are directly related to the PQS. So, you can see that there's an awful lot of deficiencies there, critical and major deficiencies that are related to the PQS, over half of the observations recorded. And really, throughout certainly my 23 years in industry, that's been consistent. The PQS is always cited in inspections. It's also always inspected in inspections, so it really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on site that deviations, change management, risk management is reviewed during inspections. Yet it's consistently an area of non-conformance. So I guess the big question is why? Why do we think that is? Observations directly related to senior management also constitute quite a significant number of the observations. So, deficiencies directly related to section 1.5 of chapter 1, where the emphasis is on senior management having the ultimate responsibility for the PQS, is commonly cited. And I think ultimately we've touched on it a few times before, but if the whole site doesn't understand the PQS, what it's there to achieve and what benefits it can bring, and that doesn't come from the top, then the rest of the teams don't really follow that. Understand, and we touched on it with when I was talking to Richard earlier, this comes both ways. So often quality don't portray themselves in the best light either, demanding kind of information or documents where nobody understands why they're being requested for this information. So I think that relationship at that site leadership level between all of the functions on the site leadership is absolutely critical, so it's clear and it's understood what the PQS is trying to do. So this next slide is things that I've been asked as a quality director. And there's, I'm just going to give you some examples. I'm sure you've all got similar examples as well. But, we've committed to this date. How can we get the batch released by then? I know it's got a deviation, but can you just release it without the deviation, because we've promised it's going to be in the market for this date? What are QA going to do about all of these overdue deviations? we've got a deviation number, we've raised a deviation, so can we just carry on now? We've not investigated, we've not got a root cause, we've certainly not implemented any kappa, but we've got a number to reference on the batch record, so can we just crack on? Even to the point where, and this is still a question that clients ask us today related to their CDMOs, we've failed the second process validation batch, but we've committed to all 3 validation batches this year, so can we just progress on to the third validation batch whilst we're investigating what happened with the second one? Well, the first question is, why on earth would you want to do that? And I think it's just that lack of understanding of, why you're asking that question. Now, of course, these questions occasionally are absolutely fine because it is sometimes appropriate to challenge timelines, to challenge reasons for why we're doing things. But I think when you're consistently asked these questions by senior members of the team, it suggests that there's a complete lack of understanding of what quality is there to achieve. And it's very dangerous, and it certainly makes the life of a quality director frustrating and difficult. So I think something that's not often talked about is, does the leadership team actually understand what their expectations are with regards to Chapter 1? These are common functions on the site leadership team. You've got operations, quality, finance, HR, procurement, engineering, supply chain, health and safety, and often the site lead on those meetings. Does everyone in that room, despite how long they've worked in GMP environments, do they understand the expectations with regard to the PQS and their responsibility in the oversight of that PQS? I think that's a key question that often is difficult to ask. And even, very recently, I did a presentation at another conference, and the questions that were coming back from the floor were overwhelmingly, how do you get the site leadership team to buy into the PQS? How do you get SLT to be more visible? These are really disappointing questions, I guess, to still being asked now. So how can organisations improve? The first thing for me, and the most important thing, I think, is being visible. So visible leadership, which I touched on before, kind of moves quality from being just a department to being everyone's responsibility and a mindset of the organisation. It sets the tone for quality. Oh, sorry, I've skipped on. Sorry. It sets the tone for quality as a core value. It drives accountability and ownership, and it builds trust and engagement. If leadership members are present on the shop floor, in the QC laboratory periodically, then it drives that empowerment of the individuals, and that leadership are actually interested in what we're doing, and they're doing the right thing, so we will do the right thing. We talked about, I think Pete mentioned before about having people be able to speak up and then suggest improvements and get them engaged in what they're actually doing. That very quickly empowers people to understand more about the process that they're doing. So things that have been around for years, like plan, do, check, act boards, they really, we've used those in a lot of situations in my previous roles to get operators and analysts engaged in what they're doing and looking for continuous improvement opportunities. So yeah, I think leading by example, demonstrating that integrity piece, and not just having these values on a board and not actually living and breathing them, I think is very important, and the most important thing that organisations can do. The second thing is the PQS should not be seen as a blocker or overly bureaucratic. Now, I'm sure we've all been involved in situations where change control systems, deviation management systems are just not fit for purpose. They're overly bureaucratic. It's a one-size-fits-all process, regardless of the size of the change or the criticality of the deviation. And that's where really quality can drive streamline and improvement of systems to help the rest of the site. The third thing I think is education. So we've touched on it a few times, but better understanding of product knowledge and process knowledge drives better risk assessment, better risk management, and better decision making. I think people are often they're in two camps. They're either very gung ho about making changes and not wanting to fully assess the risk, or they're so risk averse that they inhibit change and inhibit improvement because they simply don't understand enough about the process, and then they're erring on the side of caution. So in both of those aspects, education is key, I think. And then, like I touched on before, do we need to consider educating senior leadership in the expectations when looking after the PQS? It's very clear in the guidance documents, in the legislation, and it's also very clear that it's a consistent observation from regulatory inspections. So, why wouldn't we want to address that room and perhaps tailor some bespoke training to the SLT to make sure that they understand what their expectations are. And then the final thing I think that organisations can do to improve is use data to drive decisions. So what is the data telling you? Are you measuring the right things? Are all of your QMR metrics, your quality management review metrics in the green, yet you know that you've got whole teams constantly extending CAPA actions and things like that? That data is not telling you the right thing. Do you have the right audience at your QMR meetings? Is the audience actually stifling open discussion around what your actual problems are? Especially in complex supply chains, you've often got people dialing in from corporate positions and maybe that stifles the discussion at an operational and site level to talk about what's actually going wrong and what you need to do. But the revised ICHQ9 guidance talks about more robust risk management, and also the recent updates to Chapter 1 encourages better use of data to drive better decision making, using the data in your PQR more effectively and things like that. So I think that's all very much linked into how the organisations can improve. So moving on to quality management maturity, this refers to the degree to which an organisation's quality management system is developed, integrated and optimised across its operations. And there's 5 key dimensions of quality management maturity. This was talked about in 2019 when CEDA recommended a rating system, and they launched some limited pilot studies. But essentially the 5 key elements are governance and leadership, so a commitment from top management and a clear quality vision and strategy with accountability and ownership of quality. Processes and systems, so standardized and documented practices, which is pretty standard. I think we're not too bad at that. But then integration of quality into business processes, understanding the value of having quality in those business discussions early in the process. Very often quality are brought on board when it's already been agreed that we're going to make this product and we're going to supply these markets without any real discussion around how we're actually going to do that. And then it linked to that process and systems piece is the use of data and metrics for continuous improvement. And then the third thing is culture and people. So, we've talked a lot about culture, having that quality mindset across all levels, which I think, it does come very quickly if all of the functions on the SLT work well together. And likewise, it's very quickly destroyed if the SLT work in silos. So I think, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly, to be honest. And, if that SLT works well and everyone has an understanding of what each other's roles are on that leadership team, then it very quickly follows that teams below the leadership level work well together as well and, have that cross-functioning mentality. The fourth point on technology and tools. So, encouragement to use digital tools for accurate quality monitoring, use of automation and analytics wherever possible, and integration of systems. So Dave, you mentioned before about having an IT strategy where you can integrate all of your systems as much as possible. It's amazing. We still go to see a lot of clients where they look to do value stream mapping exercises and see where blockers in their processes are. And every single session that I've sat in, there's always an amazing discovery about a step that nobody knew happened. So, it's these invisible workflows that aren't part of the routine process but are consistently happening that absorb all of the time and the effort and often introduce a lot of the risk. And then the fifth point is continuous improvement. So, using root cause analysis tools properly to develop the right CAPA. What is the correct CAPA and how are we going to check that CAPA has been effective? And it's not saying that you have to get this right every single time. You know, you've done your investigation, you've got a whole pool of data, and you're going to implement this CAPA, which you believe will fix the problem. If it doesn't fix the problem, we'll reassess the situation. But, you know, I'm very mindful to apply a pragmatic approach as much as possible as well. You know, we do have to solve issues, you know, usually relatively quickly in production environments. So it's not that we're going to take 3 weeks and analyse this problem to death. It's, you know, let's do the best investigation that we can using all of the knowledge that we've got in the room, and then come up with a CAPA, and let's review if it's effective. Yeah, feedback loops is key for that continuous improvement. You know, I've often heard, oh yeah, we'll have a what went well meeting after this project's finished. You know, I mean, they don't often happen, and if they do, would say, well, it just went. Like, let's just move on to the next project. So yeah, doing those meetings well does often learn. You know, you can learn a lot from them before you run into the next project. So just to summarise then, benefits of QMM, more robust risk decision making. Often it can realise regulatory flexibilities. So, you know, as described in ICH Q12, something that Julia touched on as well, about if you proactively prepare how you would deal with a change in the supply chain or a part of your manufacturing process, you know, then that gives the regulators some confidence that you actually know what you're talking about, you've understood the process, and you know how to adapt should you need to change. Stronger commitment to continuous improvement. As Pete touched on before, as an industry, we're very, very bad at calculating the true cost of quality. And, you know, I've absolutely no doubt that if we did that properly, leadership teams would listen, because we could potentially save a lot of money in kind of rework and delays in review and delays in release because of deviation investigations or out of spec investigations. So, but we don't generally take the time to calculate that cost of true quality. And then obviously the public health return on investment. Proper quality management maturity can help organisations remain agile and reliable, which hopefully mitigates drug shortages, you know, ultimately helping public health. So it did appear that everything went quiet at the FDA on quality management maturity until very recently. So there was a paper published in July 2025, actually, which is, you know, a really good document. Quality management initiatives in the pharmaceutical industry, and it's an economic perspective. So it describes how strategic investments in quality management initiatives have potential to yield returns for the company and also for public health, so from a drug shortages perspective. So I definitely recommend that you have a read of that. It's a really well-written document, and it does give some tangible examples of how small improvements can help with a large return on investment. So it's a very interesting document. And as you might imagine, NSF have a tool for managing for monitoring quality management maturity. So we wrote a paper back in 2024 on quality management maturity levels, and those are the stages from 0 to 5 across the top there. And I think, you know, realistically, most organisations, in my experience, and it might be that I've just worked for really bad companies, granted, but are around stage 2 and stage 3. They're either very reactive to situations consistently, or they're fairly standardised. They've got basic metrics in place, but they're not really data-driven. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, but in my experience, I would say most organisations sit between stage 2 and stage 3, simply because there generally isn't enough headspace to move to that next level because of the reactive nature of the organisation. And as you can see described there, you know, hopefully there's not many in stage 0 where there's a complete non-compliance to GXPs. But stage 2 is, you know, your basic compliance is in place, still very reactive, still a very high level of unplanned events. And then stage 3, processes are more standardized and documented, and they've got basic metrics in place. But again, are those metrics measuring the right things, and are they driving the right decisions or the right questions to be asked? So coming towards the end of my presentation then, some essentials for quality management maturity from my view. Define your senior leadership team. Make sure as a leadership team you know and understand the quality systems at a site and potentially at a corporate level as well. Have those difficult discussions, preferably behind closed doors with just the senior leaders there. But are they aware of their responsibilities with respect to the PQS? Be visible. Make sure that the teams are out and about. We introduced at one of the organisations that I worked, like a kind of layered auditing approach where, daily sort of almost Gemba walkarounds were happening at a shop floor level from an operator level. Then there was a team leader level that used to do a weekly walk around. Then there was more a business unit leader type walk around that happened monthly. And then senior leaders would do a quarterly review of different areas of the facility. They would partner up 2 or 3 of the senior leaders together and go and look at different areas of the facility, which is great from a visibility perspective. It gets them out there and, get people talking to them and communicating with them. And also they often see things with a different pair of eyes. If I'm going around with an engineer or with a head of health and safety, for example, you see different things. Management review, do it. You'd be surprised at how many organisations don't do it. And aim for little and often, I would suggest. Encourage questions. So moving quickly on to the next point is encourage each leader to deliver information for their area. So, there's nothing worse than when you join an organisation and the quality management review meetings and all of the quality metrics are the responsibility of the quality team. That's not the way it works. And there will be resistance for sure, but it certainly drives engagement if engineering, operations have to bring their own data to the meeting, and also defend it rather than quality having to defend it. I would definitely encourage open questions. Have those debates. Often there's quite a wide ranging audience at the QMR meetings, including trainee QPs and kind of leaders of the future. So, that's a great forum for them to learn how to have these debates and get perspective from different areas of the business. Ensure all leaders know the basics. We've talked about that. Talk the talk and walk the walk. Set the tone of quality as a core value across the business. And then finally, continuous improvement. It's a fundamental part of ICHQ 10. It's the hallmark of kind of a mature quality system that you're consistently looking back and how can we do things better. And that is it from me. Thank you.